Hey folks, the Washington Post says Dow Jones hits an all-time high as investors cheer progress on inflation. I'm literally reading the Post. That's one of our top stories today. Now, before you say, what do I care about Dow Jones? I don't do that, I'm out. Did you hear the part about cheering investors? If you're watching this video, then you're a business person or investor, very often one and the same. Today's the day. I'm going to take my 15 years of representing real estate investors like you, package it up neatly, put a bow on it, and lay it at your feet. Now, I suspect some of my colleagues are not going to be happy that I'm doing this video. I am kind of giving you the keys to the kingdom, but 'tis the season, so here we go. This is the long-awaited follow-up to our episode 10, which was about the use of LLCs in your real estate activities. If you haven't seen that episode, stop, go watch that first. You're gonna say, what do I care about LLCs? I already know all about those. Well, maybe you do, and maybe you don't. We're not gonna go back over that stuff, other than for me to remind you now of our discussion regarding the benefits of using an LLC in your dealings with, specifically, third parties. If you wanna hear the fuller story, then go back and watch that episode 10, but to summarize, essentially, don't mess around with bankers, title companies, accountants, or foreigners of any kind who may or may not have any idea what a trust is or how to deal with a trust. Many of them will not. So save yourself a headache, just give them an LLC and everyone will be happy. So that is one of the things that I love about an LLC. It's familiarity. You also get the corporate shield, of course. Take a look at episode 5 for more on limiting liability. Now, less obvious is how you can save money on taxes with an LLC. Now, technically, it shouldn't matter whether you have your property in your personal name or in a trust or in an LLC. You should be able to deduct your personal expenses related to your rental and investment activities, no matter what. But, to be fair, it probably is easier as a practical matter to get those deductions with an LLC, less likely to be challenged by the IRS. So great, hooray for LLCs, but that's 101. Let's move on to the advanced course now. So we don't want to give up the advantages of an LLC, but we also don't want to give up the advantages of a land trust. Oh, and what advantages might those be, you ask? Well, I have been extolling the virtues of the Florida Land Trust for some time now. I'm going to drop some links below so you can follow up on my articles and get more details. In particular, I published one article in which I set an LLC side by side with a land trust, and I talk about the similarities and the differences between the two. If you do have a look at that article, you'll see that, well, some of it's just vocabulary. Whereas an LLC has a president, a trust has a trustee, but in terms of function, they're very similar. You know, the president signs off on the LLC's business in the same way that a trustee signs off on the trust business. Now, there are some differences though, which gives rise to pros and cons. So let's focus on the pros of a trust for a moment. First, liability protection. You get the same liability protection with a trust as you do with an LLC. I'm dumbing this down just a little bit. Go back to that episode 5 if you want to get into the details on the analysis. But basically, you put a property in an LLC in order to get it out of your personal name, right? That way, if something goes wrong, the plaintiff is going to go after the LLC and not after you personally. Well, you accomplish the exact same thing with a trust. A land trust is an entity just like an LLC. So instead of coming after you personally, the plaintiff has to go after the trust. Okay, point number 2 is succession planning. So, okay, an LLC has an operating agreement, and you can get into somewhat what happens if you, as the owner and president, die or become incapacitated. You are somewhat limited though, in my opinion, because an LLC is not really an estate planning vehicle. If you keep it really simple, just say, if I die, my wife becomes a president, then fine, assuming your partners are okay with that. But if you go very much farther than that, then you risk confusing the judge. Or better said, you risk somebody challenging the provisions and then having a judge say, yeah, an operating agreement is really not the place for all this succession planning. So I'm not saying you can't write up whatever you want and put it in the operating agreement, but there could be an enforceability issue. I'm tempted to say that that's just my opinion, but the reality is you don't see it. You don't see anything other than very superficial treatment of succession in an operating agreement. And that's because those provisions really belong in a will or a trust. Well, a land trust is a type of trust, So you can actually use it as an estate planning vehicle if you want. Let me put it to you this way. LLCs fall under a certain chapter of the state statutes, the Limited Liability Act. And those statutes are all about business. There isn't much there addressing succession. But the land trust falls under a totally different chapter with statutes that do anticipate and do accommodate estate planning. So do you see what I mean? It's far more comfortable for a judge or whomever to deal with who gets what and under what conditions and who's going to be in charge and what are we going to do with minors, etc. in the context of a trust. So that is one distinct advantage of a trust over an LLC. You get to use the trust for your business purposes, but then you also have that feature of estate planning if you want it. Next up, privacy. Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. You're going to want to wake up. This part you're going to want to catch. Now, with an LLC, there are ways to keep your personal name out of the public record, but it requires additional measures. I'm in Florida at the moment, and here in Florida, the corporate division is, in my opinion, way too transparent. Owner information, officer information, full addresses, it's all out there. It's right there on the website for anyone to easily pull up at any time. Now, you may say that doesn't matter to you now, but the day that it does matter to you, it'll be too late. So let's not do that. That's not smart business. Okay, check it out. So with a land trust, it does not have to be registered with the State Department, at least not if you structure your portfolio the way I'm going to suggest. There will be a deed recorded, which will show the name of the trust, but you don't have to put all your personal information out there. Now, some of you wise guys are thinking, but you have to put the name of the trustee along with the name of the trust on the deed. So that puts my personal name in the public record. Okay, you're savvy, good for you. There's a solution, but you're not getting it for free. You're gonna have to call me for a consultation. Next point is flexibility. This goes along with the privacy point. Since you don't have to register the trust or record the trust document, then it's very easy to make changes. You don't have to file an amendment with the State Department, pay a fee, wait for the filing to get processed. No, none of that. You just call me up, tell me the change you want to make, I make the change, you sign, and we're done. The next point is ease and expense. Trusts are cheaper. Now I know it's not particularly expensive to register a company, maybe less than $200. And even if you pay a professional registered agent, well, you're still only talking about $100 a year or something. So, you know, it's not a killer. But what if you have lots of LLCs? You know, one for each property that you own. It can add up. Well, with a trust, you don't have those expenses, as minimal as they might be. But maybe more importantly, you don't have the risk of forgetting to timely renew the registration. Now, the penalty for missing a deadline is $400 to $600. So again, if you have multiple LLCs, well, that you might notice. Okay, let me move on to my final point. My last video got a little bit long, so let me just summarize by saying that a trust has some advantages over an LLC that would be a shame to give up. So now we're getting to it. How do we get the best of both worlds? So now we've come to the grand finale. It almost feels a little anticlimactic. After going through this exercise, suddenly this seems a bit obvious, but you know, it took me years to figure out, and to be fair, most people haven't figured it out, so I guess it's not that obvious. Anyway, here's what you're going to do. Okay, step one, you're gonna make your LLC a parent company. You'll open the bank account for the LLC, you'll pay your taxes, i.e. rents and capital gains, through the LLC. Everyone will understand your LLC and will be happy. It will be easy and efficient to use the LLC as your parent or primary vehicle. Okay, now you're in the real estate investment business, so you have some properties that are rentals and some that are fix and flips. You have a portfolio. You're not going to create a brand new LLC for each and every property. I mean, what? Are you going to have 10 or 20 different registrations to keep up with, pay your accountant a bunch of extra money to prepare those filings, have your ownership and your assets in the public record for your friends and enemies to see? No, you're not going to do that. That's not efficient. There is something called a series LLC, but forget about that too. I got something better. Now, by the same token, you're not going to just cram all those properties into one LLC. That's not smart asset protection, right? If something goes wrong with one of those properties, then all of the properties will be exposed. You do get the corporate shield for yourself personally, but if anyone sues the LLC, they'll have all those assets to go after, so that's no good. Instead, you're going to put your individual properties into separate land trusts, one for each. Why not? It's cheap, no registration fees, no yearly renewals, no registered agents. Why not have a separate land trust for each property? If you do it that way, the asset protection is beautiful. If something goes wrong with one property, the plaintiff can sue one trust. That's it. Can't get to the other properties, can't get through to the LLC. Not easily. Now, speaking of your LLC, all those individual land trusts will be owned by your LLC. So you have your LLC up here, and then below it you have all the individual land trusts. All the income generated by the land trust will flow up through your LLC. Then you can decide whether the LLC income flows through to you personally or if the company files as a C Corp, whichever is more tax efficient. But let's not go too far into that point. I need you to come see me for something. So that's the basic paradigm here. You know, put your individual properties into land trusts, and all those land trusts will be owned by your LLC. So then you have this setup, and the setup can be replicated as many times as you need to. So maybe you have one of these for your Miami properties, and you have another one for your San Francisco properties, etc. So that is why you care about the Dow Jones today. Seems like we've traveled a long way from my opening, haven't we? So I've said what I came to say. That's how you're going to get the best of both worlds, the best of an LLC and the best of a land trust. It seems a bit obvious now, but it took me years of good experiences and more importantly, bad experiences to see it. With this setup, you get the familiarity of an LLC, no fighting with bankers who don't know how to deal with trusts. Go check out that episode 10 for the full story. Your accountant will need to know a little something about trusts, but you know, as long as the income is flowing up from the land trust into your LLC, I mean, there shouldn't be that much to it. It's like a one-page form he has to fill out, that's it. But if you use this setup, you will have wonderful asset protection, great privacy, and tremendous flexibility. On the cheap, if you use my firm to set up your land trust, it's a one-time fixed fee. There are no annual renewals, there are no registered agent fees. In fact, it's perfect.